It has actually made it less affordable for new home buyers.
Agreed.
Because they either are going to go with no compensation or no representation, or they are going to have to pay more. And what's worse? I mean, I don't know. For someone that's never bought a house before. Welcome to the podcast.
What's up, guys?
Kayla, Elliot, and Keith over here.
Hey. Well, what's going on is there has been a seismic settlement on behalf of the National Association of Realtors in all of the commission lawsuits.
I heard they threw all these big brokerages under the bus.
They totally threw the big brokerages under the bus, and there aren't many of them. But let's unpack the settlement. Who wants to give a high-level overview of the details?
Who?
I can. Yeah, say I can.
Why don't you, Kayla?
You know well. I'll do it because I actually I did a bit of a coaching session on it yesterday and kind of read through some of the briefings and whatnot on a little bit. So most agents, again, our audience is going to be usually real estate industry. So if you guys have not heard, the National Association of Realtors has reached a proposed settlement to basically stop the class or not be a part of this class or settlement for the class action lawsuit of $418 million. It still has to be approved by a judge, right? So, and we'll see how it all shakes out with the Department of Justice and a lot of those things. But not only from the cash settlement piece is it of massive proportions, it's actually of massive proportions because it removes any disclosed buyer compensation off of the MLSs. So what it does is it really, buyer's agents now potentially have to go show properties without making any compensation. Or they must obviously, in order to also show homes to buyers and buyer's agents, they must have a buyer-broker agreement in place as well. So all of that disclosed compensation, everything must be done up front.
But I also read that they can still negotiate that
Absolutely.
outside of the MLS.
Correct.
So there's going to start being some crafty stuff going on.
Not only that, in some of the things that I read, it actually talked about to where they may make an area where a seller can propose buyer concessions, and then in turn those buyers concessions would potentially be used to offset the buyer broker agreement. Right.
But a lot of those concessions are used usually for loan costs and stuff. So now they're going to have to be used for real estate costs. So, our lenders are going to allow more concessions.
And also, a seller can't say okay, hey, for instance, a home warranty is included, but if you have a buyer's agent or if you don't have a buyer's agent, it's not included. So that concession can't be conditioned upon representation.
Yep. We actually just the lawsuit isn't even fully in effect yet. We actually just dealt with that one of our resales, where there was a discrepancy right at the end, and I didn't know about it until Title brought it up, that the buyer's agent was trying to get paid 1% out of the seller's concession, and the lender would not allow it.
Not approve it.
And so therefore, I was like, hey, that's between them. You guys have to figure it out. Obviously, the agent's aware they can't not allow the transaction to close over a commission dispute, and obviously they had their conversation. I don't know exactly what that looked like, and that got removed. So I don't really know how much that's going to play into effect, and that'll be allowed.
It's going to depend on the lender, right, and their overlays and their allowables, not allowables, because you're absolutely right. I know there was one that we had here in the JK office recently that I was talking with John about the other day, where there was some concessions that were allowed to a buyer, and it almost blew up the entire deal. Because the lender wouldn't approve the concessions that were going on, and it was completely within the 6% range and of concessions. I think it was only a few percent, but they literally pretty much didn't allow it because it was their overlays on it that apparently per the underwriter, and it was only noticed on the final settlement statement. It almost blew up the deal.
Well, it makes sense. Any contract that I've read everywhere across the country, that we've facilitated and been a part in deals, is because the seller to buyer concession says nothing about paying a real estate agent. Mm-hmm. So therefore, I would imagine it's going to be outside regulations for lenders, and maybe that's opening up a lawsuit later down the road, slinging commissions from concessions when really written in stone in the contract, it says nothing about that. So that could open up more stuff. So.
I think NAR has been talking to FHFA probably and HUD and the regulators and trying to get that approved.
Especially FHA.
I anticipate that too.
You imagine
think
like
so.
an FHA, they put 3.5% down. Now they have an extra, now they pay for their own agent, which
That doubles their down payment,
Yikes.
basically.
They're not going to be able to buy a house. It has actually made it less affordable for new home buyers.
Agreed.
Because they either are going to go with no compensation or no representation, or they are going to have to pay more. And what's worse? I mean, I don't know. For someone that's never bought a house before.
If you're finding this video interesting, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. I know we've talked about how buyer's agents inspire a lot of transactions.
Tons.
Yeah, you get all these people
Yeah.
that they don't know if they can afford a house, but then they start, the agents are going like, hey, you should buy a house, home ownership, because they know there's a commission at the end of it. Agents aren't going to do that anymore. Why are they going to
Less
be like,
likely.
hey, home ownership, come work with me. I can show you how to buy a house.
Well,
It'll still happen, but
Okay, so in the grand scheme of things, the $418 million was a drop in the bucket. And buried deep in the settlement agreement, in one of the appendices, they outlined what the big brokerages have to pay. And some of these big brokerages are on the hook for millions and millions and millions of dollars. So think Compass, think EXP, think At Properties, think William Ravis. They are on the hook for close to over $2 billion.
$2 billion?
Yes, when you total it up. So
didn't
Rob
realize
Hahn
that.
did a really great analysis of what that can look like for these big brokerages that weren't part of the original settlement. So Anywhere, Keller Williams, Remax, those are all, of course, settled. So that total settlement amount of $627 million, which is the 418, the 83.5, the 70 from KW, and the one something from Anywhere. It totals $627 million, which is actually a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
And from NAR's perspective, they threw those big brokerages under the bus. I mean, totally, completely. And in fact, some are saying there could be a civil war of sorts amongst real estate because of it. So you got to think that this settlement proposal was done unbeknownst to them. They weren't included in the negotiations. Guess how long NAR has to pay the
4 years.
Yeah. And guess how long the brokers have? Immediately. So
That's trash.
So basically, they
trash.
agreed to a settlement, and they included everyone, and then they say to everybody that's a big brokerage, which is over $2 billion in sales volume, I think in 2022, and all of those individuals are going to have to ante up right away.
yeah, that's what I was saying. The Compass has like 160 million, and they would have to pay like 80 something million. That leaves them with about 80 million left, which their burn rate I think was like 80 million in a quarter.
So Compass,
goodness.
so Compass sells
Scary
to
time.
Compass
Scary
sells
time.
to Anywhere, so that they can be included in the settlement agreement, and then their liability is a wash. So there could be some
Wow.
interesting things that happen, but compensation survived, and I think that's the takeaway here.
Yeah.
Is when we were looking at what could have happened and what the judge for the Sitzer Burnett case, he had the authority to issue an injunction against compensation sharing. So there's nothing that prohibits a seller from paying a buyer's agent commission. So it's a massive win.
If it passes, if it gets
Yeah. If you
Yeah,
get
but they're saying that like they probably were talking to DOJ because
Okay.
the plaintiff's attorney, Michael Ketchmark, has been really loud, outspoken about how he's been talking with DOJ. And so why would they have entered into this if they didn't
think it was gonna be
yes, it would have at least passed
Yep.
the DOJ smell test.
Yep.
I don't know. It's interesting.
Wow.
So
There's some pissed off executives.
Well, there is, and I'm sure you
Compass
guys
and-
saw on Facebook and IG, every platform, right? The agents kind of going on and saying, oh well, this isn't going to change anything because sellers are going to want to attract. I saw several ones. I think it was lab coat agents where they were talking about. Posts by New York Times, CNN, and how they were off base, and a couple of them that were on base. And one of the biggest things that is, I am curious to see how it plays out, is sellers are going to want to still incentivize
But they're not gonna be
their
able
home
to.
to sell.
They're not going to be able to.
You're right.
How-
You're going to
how
have
are
to.
they? How would they? The only way they can communicate is through MLS.
So there
Agreed.
is one of the
You put it on the sign?
No, in the settlement
Yeah.
agreement. In the settlement agreement, there is a provision for realtors, or maybe the brokerages will do this, to have some sort of public offering on their sites that says what their commission offering is. So like JK Realty could take all of our listings, we could take our IDX feed, we could add in another field for compensation to the buyer's agent, and we could publish that on our front-facing website.
Oh.
And so there could be like mechanisms for agents to do that. We just can't like organize it through an MLS.
Yeah, I saw what you were talking about, and my question in my mind, and that is especially from like an API endpoint, how is that going to syndicate?
It won't syndicate.
Okay, good.
There's no
That's
field.
exactly
like,
it.
so what would syndicate?
It would only go to
there's
your
nothing.
own site.
So you have to be driving some type of traffic or audience to your site to actually be able to.
Well, I think this actually makes steering worse, because if they're saying that the whole reason for this was steering, so okay, now I have a buyer and I have a buyer broker agreement, and I'm going to get 3%, and I'm going to go show this Remax listing, I'm going to go show this Keller Williams listing, and I'm going to go onto Remax's site and see what the compensation is for this one, and I'm going to go to Keller Williams site and see what the compensation is for this one, and this one's only 2%. I'm going to show this one for 3% first. Like, this
And I'll
doesn't
dog
solve
on this one.
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
doesn't solve the problem of
Doesn't-
steering. It's bullshit. To be real, it's such bullshit.
Agreed. Well, and part of my biggest thing in this, right, is like, just being an American, is like how is the court system supposed to be able to tell me how and who I can pay with my equity?
Well, they can't. This isn't what that is.
I understand that, but there's certainly
just saying you can't put it in the
limiting
MLS.
factors.
Can't you put it in the comments?
No, you can't use the MLS anywhere to display compensation. So
Can you change your name? Could we be JK Realty Always 3% LLC?
sure,
Yeah.
you could.
Well, and I saw some crafty stuff like that you were talking about, where like they'll highlight certain parts of the words, and it was like 3%,
Yeah.
and like certain words that
I
were
saw that,
spelt
too.
out. Yeah.
The dumbing down of the real estate profession. Like one agent shares it, and then before you know it,
But that's
it's
a way to
shared
do it, though,
1,000
right?
times.
You just
Yep.
put in that little verbiage, and everyone knows that, hey, that's what that is.
That's the way to do it. I don't know.
Well, just
no,
like
that is not the way to do it.
remember Craigslist, right? When you used to be able to sell, they wouldn't let you do external links, and then like you could
Get
like
all
spell
creative.
it out and getting creative. Yeah.
Put .dot.com.
Yeah. Spelling out. Yeah, I do remember that.
Yep.
So interesting times. What are the unintended consequences? I mean, I know we've talked a little bit about the unintended consequences already, and there's probably going to be more. And I think as this plays out, for me, I look at the big guys like the portals. And
Yes, good one.
yeah, so if you look at, take a look at some real estate stocks, and what you're going to find is Zillow is down 14%, Redfin's down 19%, EXP is down 23%, Anywhere is down 9%. Guess who's not down? Guess who's up almost 9%?
I don't know who.
CoStar.
CoStar, really?
Homes.com.
Homes.com. You're listing your lead. So their business model isn't based on buyer agent revenue. And so you look at Zillow, I'd say 70-80% of their revenue comes from either Premier Agent or Flex.
Yeah. Giant.
And
Yep.
so this new requirement that's going to require the written buyer broker, how is that going to work with these on-demand showings? Because the rule states that it must be in writing prior to showing homes.
Yeah, but how do they prove that, though?
Yeah, what's the
How do
policing
you
of
really
that?
prove it? I mean, what are you gonna do? It's like your there's a lot of agents that don't have a buyer sign their agency until they're ready to sign a contract.
Tons. That's
So-
been like a very common practice.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm guilty of it.
I'm guilty of it too.
Well, that was my initial thought is, they'll just throw the buyer broker in there before we
contract
write the
value.
offer.
Contract,
Yeah,
yeah.
right, when we're writing it. But no. And some of the legal analysts think that like a pop-up modal on Zillow that says, hey, you agree to pay this agent X% and blah, blah, blah. They're going, that is not going
Not
to
going to
fly.
happen.
Well, even if they did do that, I think there'd be a way for consumers to go like, "That's I didn't know I was signing that."
Yeah.
I don't think that's.
Think about when you talk about the 4 to 6 million transactions that happen, how many deals happen where somebody just showed up at a house, met them, got a sign call, a Zillow lead, no buyer broker, nothing, no agreement in place, show up, hey, I got an hour, I could show you 3 other properties. They pull the trigger on one of them, and a deal happens. Right? We're talking about potentially taking that off the table.
Or what about open houses?
People are going to be doing a lot of open houses now. You better
Are
go out
they?
there.
Buyer
yeah.
comes through. You don't have a signed contract.
Oh yeah. Well, how are you gonna?
But it's going to save your seller money, right? You do both sides. And if you have a
it'll just be an unrepresented buyer.
If you have a 4 or 5%, you just go, okay, well, you want to use your agent. Well, you're not going to get as good as a deal as you are, because you're going to have to pay for the agent. So do you want to do that, or you want to not? Because now they'll be able to do that, right? You'll be able to say that. You'll be able to say, like, this, it's not guaranteed. There's no compensation guaranteed here.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of,
if you're going to bring an agent, you're going to have to pay for that agent.
Right.
Whereas if you just work with me, you won't have to pay for the agent.
I mean, I hope it's a case by case. I hope the seller has the ability to negotiate ad hoc on whether they're going to pay or not. And I'm not clear on that based on what I've read.
I mean, they should be, because if they did, that would be going against the rule, right? I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Now you're saying that they have to like agree to it up front at the listing,
right?
Well, there's no question. I mean, and we'll see how it builds up back over time. But I definitely saw some places that are predicting that as many as 1 million real estate agents could leave the business over this.
So I feel like that's
a little
hyperbole,
bold. Yeah,
a little bit,
bold.
yeah. But no doubt, we're going to see washout. We're going to see agents.
It has to, based on, think about what we just pointed out. The amount of deals that are done based on that right there is seismic.
Yeah, because there's so many new agents that walk into the business and then they just go find buyers. They work with buyers. They don't have to worry about a buyer broker.
Yeah, they use their buddy's listing.
They get screwed a lot, and they'll get shopped by buyers, and buyers they'll show them some houses and get screwed. But then they run into buyers that'll use them, and they make 3%, or walk right into a new build and be like, here you go, and make 3% 9 months later. It's just not going to happen anymore. I think it's going to be a lot harder. Be like, I got to negotiate my commission.
Or will it be easier because there will be less competition?
That's to me the silver lining.
Well, we've done some commercial deals, and it's not always easy. There's
less competition.
Commercial, you negotiate the commission when you're negotiating the contract, and it's it's not easy.
That's what I was going to say. Are we going to look to commercial as some of the frameworks that we can follow? From some of this. Speaking of CoStar.
Yeah, probably. I mean, that's what it's looking like.
Yeah.
And I think that another thing that's been kind of alarming is this almost like psychological warfare against the realtor on behalf of the media.
Yeah. Yeah, they're saying that this brought down all
yeah,
commissions.
Like it's been hard to buy a house, but it's gonna be easy. It's about to get easier.
It's gonna be cheaper. Like,
yeah,
no, it's not. Not for the new home buyer.
I saw something, and again, this was highlighted in the actual document where they were talking about that they did some the Federal Reserve did some type of research on this, and they're
Are you talking about the Consumer Federation of America?
Yes,
that's very different than the Federal Reserve.
Yeah. Thank you for the correction. Mm-hmm. That they were predicting that as much as $30 billion will go back to the buyers, et cetera, and that money primarily coming from buyers' agents, right? So if there's approximately $100 billion that gets paid out in commission, so then you take half of that, which is 50, and they're predicting 30%. So they're saying that almost 50, it's going to be a 50 to 60% hit in buyer compensation. That is obnoxiously seismic.
So,
I think it's going to go back to the sellers.
Yeah, exactly. Like
I do too. I think the sellers are the ones who are going to win.
The sellers are going to win.
Yeah, exactly. Because the house prices are already artificially inflated by the cost of selling.
Yeah.
So they're gonna say, oh, you don't use an agent, and you can get it for this price. Use an agent, you get it at this price. And they're gonna be like, what are buyers gonna do? I'm not gonna use an agent. I want it for the cheaper price.
Yeah, we'll see, and I still think that there's just a lot. I think greed is a real thing, and there's a lot of people that are just gonna be like, hey, my house says it's worth this much. This is what I'll sell for, especially while we're in the low inventory stage where we're at. I mean, we'll see, right? Like I personally looked at a house in my neighborhood last night that's been sitting on the market for a little bit, and it's usually things sell quickly, but it was a remodeled house that was done terribly, and I could totally see why it's sitting on the market, right? So I still think that those things are going to exist. The house still has to be priced in position, conditioned in position with the price to receive what you want in the market, especially with the cost of capital the way it is.
Yeah. If I were selling my own home right now, I would absolutely offer concessions for a buyer's agent. Absolutely. Like, it just makes sense. It's smart.
It makes sense. Yep. I think
but you can't.
I could offer concessions in MLS.
Oh, okay. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I know. It's going to be crazy. What
Can you say concessions for commissions?
I love it how the industry largely ignored a lot of this. I know we've been talking about it here at Zoodealio for a bit, but by and large, everybody kind of ignored it. Like, nothing was going to happen, and if something did happen, it wasn't really going to fundamentally change anything. And
I feel like you've been talking about this for 2 years at least.
Well, and I think that by and large, leadership in real estate across the U.S. has failed realtors miserably. Because the only people this hurts are the marginalized. So you have your first-time home buyers, your minority home buyers, your VA home buyers, your FHA home buyers, and it hurts realtors.
Yes.
The big guys will recover. They're going to figure it out. They're going to come out of this probably ahead. I tend to think that it's going to favor ultimately the conglomerates, but it's the disenfranchised realtor, which has always been the problem with real estate, that is going to suffer, along with the marginalized buyers.
The marginalized buyers. That's the big part right there, and that's what's sad.
It is sad.
Because it's just going to get harder and harder for new buyers to
it's going to force you to go join one of the big guys because
I'm talking about buyers.
Got it. Okay, my bad.
New home buyers. I mean, they don't have representation.
Yep.
They have to pay for representation. Guess what? That's just an extra cost on the transaction, and so they just give up and they go, forget it. It's rent.
Well, and there's a ton of buyers out there that work with new builders that are unrepresented, and I assure you there's some horror stories out there where they got taken advantage of because they didn't have some type of something to lean back on because the builder contract favors only the builder, right? Like when you're talking about the upgrades that you're doing and you have to pay potentially 25% of them, and then something changes with the cost of capital. Right, exactly. You no longer qualify because mortgages went from 4% to 7%. You no longer can qualify for your house, and you're ousted that money potentially. Yep. There's crap like that,
or they don't know how to use the contract, and they put a earnest money deposit down. Something happens with them, and they figure they just lose their money, and they would try to lose their money.
Yep.
Instead of having an agent on their side going like, hey, well, we can talk to your lender. If you did lose your job, then you can get a loan denial, and then you can get your money back.
Yep.
Where they say, oh, I lost my job, so I guess I'm losing my earnest money. Oh, well. And they don't know, so they just lose their earnest money. I can see that happening a lot.
Absolutely. There's all kinds of little, I think, use cases that are going to...
The other part, too, is, again, right, this is all speculation. We'll see how it all ultimately ends up shaking out once the rule comes into effect and, see how all this stuff goes down. But it's really, for me, especially being super deep into the transactions, is if there's not a buyer's agent representing a buyer for negotiations during the inspection, I can't even imagine how much of a nightmare that's going to possibly be.
Jay said it.
To have to, one, they don't know what they don't know, so they could even be putting themselves in a terrible circumstance, or two, they're super over the top, and it's just like completely unrealistic. It's the spectrum's going to be super extreme on both sides.
There's going to be a lot of blown up deals.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We all know this. I mean, we have a barrage of experience up here, and we all know our clients have thrown mad mud at us that we had to filter talking to the cooperating.
Let's come back down to reality.
Yeah. and usually after they throw their little hissy fit, they call you back a couple hours the next morning and they come back down. But they're going to have that in the moment. And
it's going to piss off the seller, and the seller is going to be pissed off, and then they're going to...
Or the agent.
Yep.
Yeah, the listing agent.
Oh, boy.
Agent guys, screw this buyer, dude. They suck. Let's cancel. And agents, let's face the fact, they get emotional too sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, not sometimes, a lot of times.
Yeah. Most times. Sometimes
to justify their compensation.
Yeah.
Well said.
So, okay, I want to talk about one other aspect of this: lenders. Because there was an article on Inman today, and the CEO of Better, which we just love that guy, don't we?
The guy, he fired everybody on
guy-
Zoom.
Guy who laid off
Yeah.
1,000 people on a Zoom.
Yeah. So he came out and he said that he thinks that this actually favors lenders, because now what lenders can do is lenders can put a realtor partner program in place. And he thinks that what will happen is more home buyers will go directly to a lender first. And then when they go to the lender, then they'll get teamed up with the approved real estate agent, maybe at a discounted price. And it will actually favor lenders. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then in the Inman article, it talked about Rocket and how Rocket's partnership with realtors across the U.S. brought in $49 million in revenue last year. I was like,
Wow.
dang, that's a lot of money. And
Jeez.
and I thought that the spin on it by
50 million, huh?
yeah, I know. I thought the spin on that was interesting because initially, like on the surface, my mind went to this isn't good for lenders, because I feel like the realtors bring them a lot of the buyers.
Oh, yeah. That's been my personal experience.
But I think
Yeah.
if you have to pay for representation, you're probably going to go to a lender first, because if you're not paying for a lender, you're just like, okay, hey lender, what do I need? You know, and they're like, oh well, if you use this agent, then we discount your lender fees and you only have to pay this, and we can add it into your concessions. Your agent will try to get you concessions out of this, and
So this
the worst you have to bring in is this much. The best is this much. And
so the Jason Mitchell group just got more valuable.
Yep.
I guess so.
Yep.
Because they do
Oh,
like
yep,
a lot
yep.
of the lenders.
He's the number one
Yeah.
rocket guy too.
But how would that work? I guess my brain's not fully grasping that, because if they work with a quote unquote approved realtor partner, how does the compensation come into play?
So maybe the lender will start, putting it out there like, okay, if you use this agent, they're only going to charge you 1.5%, and then
Or
And the
maybe
other
we'll see some of
percent,
these models. I don't even know if this is still a thing, where all these lenders are going to start getting their mortgage licenses, and that's how they're going to make compensation, is by getting paid through the
the
referrals
agents?
from the lenders.
the realtors
Yeah.
will start
Yeah.
getting their mortgage. Yeah.
I mean, that
Some
was a
type
big
of,
thing for a couple of years, where some of these massive institutions
Yep.
get your license and get paid, an average of $1,500
ton of
extra
agents did
bonus
that.
on every closing.
Yep. Ton of
And
EXP.
some agents, per some of these people who are pitching those programs, if they worked with, 10, 20, 30 buyers a year, were making an extra $40,000 to $60,000. So maybe that'll
yeah.
become a thing. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
I think the agents are going to need to start looking at additional revenue streams and what that looks like.
That's what I was going to say. Is anytime that there's massive disruption, I think that it brings in an element of an opportunity for creativity. So we'll see how it can get approved. But like you were talking about before, they're clearly talking in the background, with the powers that be and the people in the settlement in this, because again, I think that there's going to be something figured out where there can be some type of compensation. As an additional example would be maybe from like a Rocket or an approved lender. Hey, you can finance 0.5%, 1% of these commissions, right? So maybe having some of these costs now be financeable. I know buyers aren't going to want to necessarily hear that, but in order to get the service, and some of the things that they're truly looking for, it could become more of the norm. Again, obviously, you're going to take the approach as the agent in the solicitation of that prospect. Hey, we're going to try to get this handled through the seller to buyer concessions, but in the event that it's not, it's also financeable. Right? I can see
It'll
the
give you a credit card with a $10,000 bill on it already, and you can pay it off in 10 years.
Yeah, if that happens, I don't think most buyers, I don't think they'll care as long as they get the value out of it that they need. It's no different than going to a car dealership. You want to finance all the bullshit fees that they put on it, but we do.
Yep.
So we don't have to fork less cash out of our pocket.
Yep.
So
It makes our payment go up $250 a month. It's all good. It's only $250.
Yep, they don't look at the long-term implications of what that's going to cost them.
It's the right now.
So interesting. There was research done on what a buyer is willing to pay. And the question was posed, if you were buying a home today and your budget was $500,000, how much would you be willing to pay for the services of a real estate agent to guide you through the process? 5% said $15,000. 15% said $12,500. 37% said $10,000, 17% said $7,500, 14% said $5,000, and 12% said $2,500. So over 20% of respondents would pay at least the equivalent of a 2.5% commission.
There you go.
And another 37% would pay the equivalent of a 2% commission. So interesting. I'll have Colby put this on
That's
screen
really good.
so that you can see this. But so buyers are willing to pay something, but not 3%.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
with
but
home prices gone, when
Only
we really
5
look at the
only
percentages,
5%.
with home prices skyrocketing the way that they've gone, data at your fingertips, the way that it's gone the last, 2 decades, really, the ability to show access properties, right? A lot of those types of things. I'm not saying that an agent's value is all wrapped up in being able to unlock the door. I'm totally not a believer of that. I think it comes down to negotiations and fiduciary, et cetera. With that said, the services rendered to your prospects have 1,000% changed exponentially over the last 2 decades. That's what I'm saying. Where maybe 3%,
hey, I think everyone likes to make 3%, but at the end of the day, that is not a standard. There's no such thing.
Right.
And kudos to the real estate industry for quote unquote brainwashing buyers and sellers that the standard is 6% and 3% because that's the only reason it exists.
Mm-hmm. And and I know that we could definitely debate that, but it's never even been a set.
It's never
Yeah.
been.
No,
said.
but
It's just
that's
ridiculous, right?
those are the numbers unanimously that
Set
are
in the
thrown
training
out
manuals.
over
Yeah.
and over and over.
Well-
and you say something enough, it becomes the trend, it becomes the norm.
And I
Yeah.
think that wasn't that part of actually some of the lawsuits or one of the class action things is like they polled an audience, what's the average cost to sell your house? And it was like 6%, 6%, 6%. And they actually kind of dove into what we talked about right here, is that there is no standard. However, because the community has price fixed at 6%, that's what they saw. I may be butchering what I remember on this.
We could keep debating, but I mean, most sellers are buyers, and a lot of them are moving up, and so they're getting the value of services that exceed what they're paying a buyer's agent when they're buying if they're moving up.
Yep.
And and just another reason why this is just such BS. It's a leadership fail. And I think that we're seeing that. And, you look at the National Association of Realtors and it's just like this too big to fail organization. And I read about the chief legal officer at EXP came out and said that the number one question he got asked over the weekend was, can I leave NAR? Agents don't want to be a part of NAR anymore, by and large. By and large, we're done with NAR. They sold us out. I mean, they clearly don't care about the average realtor. They don't care about first-time home buyers. They don't care about
the big brokerages based on what you just shared.
I know it's startling.
Yeah.
So what's next for the industry after this? Elliot, you mentioned that innovation at times like this is rampant, and I think that we're going to see some really cool innovation.
Mm-hmm.
I think the hard part is it's hard for us to take off our biases and take off all of the things which we already know. We can't unlearn what we know and look at this through a fresh perspective. You mentioned creativity. It's really hard to be creative when you're stuck in the confines of what you've always done. And so I'm really excited to see what sort of creativity comes out of this, what we can create here even at Zoodealio to really serve this. I know we're absolutely trying. We have been for years. I mean, we've seen the writing on the wall for years and have been just diligently, passionately empowering realtors to really fight back and not be that disenfranchised little guy, to have big tech, to have solutions, to be able to meet the consumer where they're at. And I know that we'll continue doing that. What is it going to look like, though? That's the question.
That is the question.
Well, we'll see on our next podcast. We'll see you guys later.